The events in Afghanistan in the month of August have taken everybody by surprise, mostly people in the American intelligence agencies and Joe Biden's administration. But America must bear responsibility for how things have unfolded in Afghanistan. By most accounts, it has perhaps been the worst intelligence failure for America in recent memory. But President Biden, who seemed to have 3 decades of experience in foreign policy, cannot absolve himself of the responsibility for how Afghanistan's cities in general and Kabul in particular fell. Between the 6th of August and the 15th of August, almost all key cities in Afghanistan fell to the Taliban. The Taliban, which is an old hand in Afghanistan, it took over that country to rule it between 1996 and 2001, but has a longer history of engaging with the land of Afghanistan, notwithstanding the fact that most of the Taliban comes from the Pashtun areas who lie on either side of the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. That's known as Durand line. The Pashtuns have a fierce code. They have a great sense of honor. They are ruthless when it comes to their own traditions and tribal loyalties. And they were picked up at the time of General Zia and molded into a fighting force. Taliban are essentially meant to be students and students of madrasas, but they were eventually given a military role by a combination of the CIA of the US, Saudi Arabia's intelligence directorate, and Pakistan's ISI. This was done to create a counter to the Russian invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, because General Zia feared that the Russians would now, after having taken over Afghanistan in the 70s, would be heading to take over Baluchistan in Pakistan, so that Russia could eventually get access to the warm waters of the Arabian Sea, just like Pakistan has now given to China through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor in the port township of Gwadar in Baluchistan's coast with the Arabian Sea. So, America fell for Zia's ploy, funded the Pakistani army and the intelligence agency, and the ISI became the controller of weapons distribution and managing the counter to the Russians with an American-sponsored counteroffensive in the form of a Mujahideen. It's another story that the ISI kept large caches of arms that America paid for, but having learned their lessons from Vietnam, they did not micromanage it this time. They macro-managed it and told Pakistan, you buy it and you train and arm the Mujahideen to fight against the Russians. They kept about half of that stock to arm militants to come into Kashmir through the 90s and thereafter. Taliban's philosophy was always to keep all other influences out of Afghanistan, because as they say now and they said 20 years ago, they did not want any foreign presence in Afghanistan. In fact, most recently, they saw America's presence in Afghanistan as an extension of the Christianization of Afghanistan, and therefore they saw themselves as a tool to counter the spread of Christianity in Afghanistan. America wasn't doing that, but just the sheer presence of American troops engaging with those in Afghanistan who chose to engage with them was enough to motivate the Taliban to keep fighting them. Fight they did, but they enjoyed a few advantages. No insurgency in history has survived without a fallback position or a pace to retreat and regroup, as the Taliban was provided by Pakistan into what came to be known as the AfPak region. AfPak region is largely Pakistan's frontier areas and the areas of Baluchistan where Taliban all had homes and families. And they went back refurbished to fight the Americans. The Americans foolishly believed all the lies that Pakistan heaped onto them. They funded the Pakistanis to the range of $33 billion till they realized it was too late. Pakistan happily armed itself and fed its generals to continue to pretend to fight America's war in Afghanistan. But that, what America called the war on terror, was really America's knee-jerk reaction to what happened in 9/11. After 9/11, President Bush in America was under huge public pressure to do something. And he knew the one place the Al-Qaeda had bases in was in Afghanistan, because American intelligence operatives had operated with the Pakistani intelligence along with the Taliban and along with Al-Qaeda to push the Russians out. In fact, bin Laden learned to fire a Kalashnikov rifle with the Taliban in Afghanistan. He was no great warrior till the Taliban projected him as such, but they also provided him protection because he gave them money. And the Taliban are Pakhtuns, and the Pakhtuns have a fierce code of Pakhtunwali, which means if they've adopted you and they've provided you shelter, they will die to defend you. And that is how Mullah Omar began to be identified by the US also as one of the top terrorists in the world. Quite frankly, Mullah Omar would be happy and would have been happy to remain in control of Afghanistan and not look at targeting another American city. But Americans always need to fight wars against an enemy they can defeat. As one historian said, they like to fight winnable wars. That's what they did in Gulf War I and II. And that's what they did in Afghanistan. But they fought one battle too many in Afghanistan. A conflict that they could have easily left after putting the punishment on Al-Qaeda and their patrons in a year or two. They carried on for 20 years. As early as President Obama's tenure, and that is well before Trump's tenure, it became obvious to Obama himself that America did not remain of any serious consequence in Afghanistan if it carried on bombing and attacking the locals. They brought damage to the Afghan people in the range of anything from 100,000 upward wounded and 60,000 upward dead. America lost many of its men also, some say 2,400 casualties. And that's a large number. Just to put it in context, that's about 5 times the number of soldiers we lost in Kargil. But more importantly, when they left now, in a hurry as they did from Bagram Air Base, they left with their reputation in tatters. It's not a good omen for the free world that America is seen as a country that doesn't have the appetite to fight for what it believes in. But what was it fighting? It wanted to change a regime. It put in 2 titular presidents there, Hamid Karzai and Ashraf Ghani. Both were detested by the Taliban and many in Afghanistan. It did not bring in any serious democratic reforms there. It's a country where there is no taxation laws. And therefore, America just pumped in money and thought they had prepared the Afghan National Army as a suitable counter to the Taliban. Having spent $83 billion on the training, arming, and equipping of the Afghan National Army. But the moment America left in the darkness of one night, the Afghan National Army felt abandoned. They had no instructions on what to do next. And even before America left, when the decision was taken that America is going to pull out, they left the management and the salaries of the Afghan National Army to President Ghani's government. And that was an absolute disaster, because Ghani's government did not pay them for months at an end. And what rations were provided to troops in the outposts was just bags full of potatoes. So troops do not survive and cannot fight endlessly just on a few morale boosting statements coming from higher commanders. They want to be cared for. They will stick it out if they know up the chain there is a determination to stick it out. But clearly the will in Afghanistan, armed forces and the political establishment had crumbled when America left. Everybody in the world was critical of how America left. Even the Russians, who are now looking for a stake in Afghanistan, said it was an irresponsible act. The Russians had been engaging with the Taliban in the last year or more by organizing peace conferences where governments could only send non-official delegates to attend, and the Taliban was getting international exposure, other than the legitimacy that they were getting in talks with American officials in Doha. Those talks were organized by a gentleman called Zalmay Khalilzad, who was President Trump's special envoy for Afghanistan, and strangely enough, Biden retained him, probably because the experience he had in dealing with Afghanistan. But Zalmay Khalilzad was in a desperate hurry to close the deal and get out. So every demand of the Taliban was met, but the Taliban did not give in very much to America's demands. They managed to free 5,000 hardcore prisoners from America and Afghan police control well before the Americans left. And they gave some assurances about peace and not harboring terrorism, which was enough to reassure America that the world was a safe place. But clearly, America was in the wrong country, fighting the wrong enemy, to quote from the title of a book by Carlotta Gall, who said precisely the same thing, that America should have been chasing the Pakistan army and the ISI, and matters in Afghanistan would have fallen into America's lap the way they wanted it to. But America was always wary of upsetting Pakistan, because Pakistan would always blackmail them that we will block the routes of your supply convoys going into Afghanistan unless you pay us more, unless you keep giving us importance. And America even announced that they were America's best non-NATO military ally. All this at a cost of countries like India and Iran, who America, if it abandoned its stupidity, could have engaged with and used to do some legwork for America if it required in Afghanistan, and provide routes to America and American logistics convoys other than from Pakistan. But Iran is part of the axis of evil, and India was not being allowed into the room because Pakistan didn't want India to be. But the elephant in the room has been, other than Pakistan, China. China has been quietly prodding and funding Pakistan to take control of Afghanistan. One, because it can get its Belt and Road Initiative to extend into Kabul. It's the pet project of Chinese President Xi Jinping. Two, it can get control over the natural resources of Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is resource rich on the face of it. It provides huge amount of opium, which China may not want, because China has a nasty history of being a country of opium addicts under British rule. And Pakistan uses that opium to make money. Most of that $19 billion a year that they earn goes to the Pakistan army to make their generals fat and comfortable. But Afghanistan has dry fruits. Afghanistan is also seen by Pakistan as their strategic depth to extend their Islamic fiefdom, not just into Afghanistan, but also into Central Asia. As I have argued, to go from the west bank of Indus right to the southern banks of the river Oxus. All that becomes part of a territory that Pakistan wishes to control, because then through natural resources, access to Central Asia, and being the game maker, as it were, in this part of the world, Pakistan suddenly becomes a player of consequence in Asian geopolitics. So the Taliban was humoured, kept sheltered, and kept going in to harass the American troops, and kept it ready to take over Afghanistan when the suitable opportunity and time came. And the Taliban did precisely that. India has made tangible investments there: parliament building, roads, highways, dams, schools, hospitals. Much of that will remain intact. Maybe the name boards will go away, because Pakistan will ensure that very little sign of India's good work is present there. But for India and Indians to think that they can play a larger strategic role in that country, for the time being, that is most unlikely. Because the Taliban, which was created largely during the last days of the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, is now a force that is confident. It's unlikely to make the major mistakes that it made last time, which meant that it became marginalized in geopolitics. And it will work in tandem with the Pakistan military's agenda, an agenda which seeks strategic depth in Afghanistan, an obsession that has been there with Pakistan's military from the post-Zia period, when General Mirza Aslam Beg spelt out their concept of having a territory in their backyard which would be safe in the event of another Indian invasion, notwithstanding the fact that India has no territorial ambitions in Pakistan. But Pakistan's army is obsessed with it. And there are many in India who are also obsessed with the fact that the Taliban's control of Afghanistan would result in the rise of insurgency in Kashmir. It is contestable on the grounds that when the last time the Taliban was in power in 1996 and 2001, the insurgency in Kashmir took off, partly because of our own inept handling of the problem in Kashmir, partly because there was no barbed wire fencing on the LOC, so people could keep coming in large numbers, and partly because the Kashmir issue was for Pakistan the rallying point by which tribal forces could be used to create upheaval in Kashmir as part of their op-to-pac. It took India a decade or more to get its act together and to understand what Pakistan's agenda in Kashmir was. But now India is much better prepared, much more fortified. And for those who argue, particularly Western analysts, that Afghanistan could be the breeding ground for the next batch of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, perhaps yes. But if it is, it's a Frankenstein monster that Pakistan has put its hands on, it has taken control of. Pakistan has to learn to deal with it. And it's unlikely that that monster can take over Pakistan and knock on India's doors. Until then, India must focus on, in the immediate, to look after Afghan refugees and give them a half-decent life here, because they've abandoned everything and come on the faith and the belief that being in India is a good choice. And in the long run, become part of an international initiative to try and engage with the people of Afghanistan, with or without the Taliban, in a manner that the people of Afghanistan do not suffer the way they suffered in the past under the Taliban. Until then, this could remain a major turning point in the geopolitics of South Asia. 15th August 2021, the day Kabul fell, will not be forgotten easily.